Could you imagine if there was a branch of the government whose members were not chosen by the people of their country and who ruled for their entire lives? It sounds ridiculous, right? What is this, some far-off dictatorship? But no, it's right here at home in the United States of America, where justices rule for their entire lives until they either retire or die after being chosen by the President of the United States. These lifelong terms have led to many, many problems within the court, which brings us to today's question of whether or not a term limit should be in place on these justices. And my answer to this question is a simple yes. They should. More specifically, 18-year term limit should be in place so that a new justice on one of the 9 slots would be put in every 2 years, and that each president would be allowed 2 recommendations of a justice per term. Now, before I get started with the reasons, I'd like to explain strategic retirements. A strategic retirement is essentially when a judge retires or waits to retire until a president of the same political party is in power, so that when they leave and their spot becomes open, they can be immediately replaced with someone with the same political beliefs. An example of someone not doing this would be Justice Ginsburg, who was a Democrat and died during Trump's term, and is actually a big reason why the Republicans currently have a massive lead in the court today. Now, these strategic retirements tend to encourage many justices to last in the court longer than they actually should, and combined with the indefinite terms, they have led to the biggest and most obvious problem that the court faces, which is justices getting too old. Now, as shown on this graph, the average age of the justices has only been increasing since it has been created. And since 1970, the average age of departure has been about 79. That's not an outlier. That is the average. That's not great. And that begs the question of why even is old justices bad? If old age mainly affects their physical health, that shouldn't matter much with their mental health, right? Well, as they get older, many justices also experience problems with their mental acuity. An example of this would be William Douglas, who served for about a year after being completely debilitated by a stroke in 1974. And while most justices aren't as awful of a case as this, it shows how big of a problem mental deterioration can become when justices aren't forced to retire. Another big reason why the lifelong term limits are a problem is that it's simply undemocratic. Now, when a justice is put in place, they will generally represent the beliefs of their time if they're chosen by a president who was chosen fairly recently. However, after the decades that a justice is in power, they will stop representing the modern will of the people and won't be caught up with the times. These new term limits would help justice be more congruent with modern culture by changing them out more often and having newer presidents choose them. And as said by former federal Judge Richard Posner, if the court is political, then it should be democratic. Now, you may be wondering that why should the court be political? And that is an interesting question. The court originally was, after all, made with the assumption that the justices would be apolitical. However, this assumption, in my opinion, is very bad. Because really, what does it mean for a justice to be apolitical? Politics is just what someone believes, and someone's cultural views and experiences will always affect what they believe and do. And while justice being political isn't necessarily a bad thing, I mean, the higher level of the government is inherently political after all, but the assumption that they're apolitical can be very, very dangerous, and it'd be more effective to just put in term limits to stop this from being a problem. Now, while this all points to term limits being generally good for the court, there are some reasonable concerns that someone can have with the proposal. One of these is the future jobs of the justices. After all, they still need to have a job to get paid so they can live a normal life. And this can lead to problems if a justice is trying to gain the favor of future employers while still in office. While justice having beliefs isn't necessarily a bad thing, this is not the type of bias we want for a justice to have in court. However, the solution to this issue is actually quite simple. It is the introduction of a concept called the senior justice. It essentially says that when a justice's term is over, they can simply be moved down to a lower, less powerful federal court, where they can serve for as long as they want until they want to retire for real. And it also has the added benefit that if there's an emergency on the Supreme Court, they can simply be temporarily moved back up to fill the slot until a new replacement justice is found. In conclusion, there are many problems with the court today that could be fixed by the simple implementation of an 18-year term limit. And while it does have some problems, these problems are small and could be fixed very easily. And while this is a big change, and even with a bunch of support, this will take a long time to be made, I believe that if we vote and raise our voices in the right way, there is light at the end of the tunnel of a future where the Supreme Court is a shining example of how change can be made for the better. Thank you.
My question for you is kind of like my question for Willem. Would it take a constitutional amendment to change their lifetime, whatever?
Yeah, almost definitely. Okay. I can't see how something that big could be made with anything less.
Okay. You guys have questions? I said Willem. I meant Declan. Go ahead, Declan. I don't know why I do that.
Would a term limit on judges in the Supreme Court, do you think it would also like root out any possible corruption? Because I know there's been allegations of corruption in the Supreme Court.
It might help, but I think that's a bit of a different issue that term limits wouldn't necessarily address.
Do these judges get paid like a large sum of money so when they are like finally like going 18 years that they could live off of it, or are they gonna have to find new jobs?
I was thinking it was around $200,000 a year, but I could be wrong. There is an amount that they make.
So you're asking like if they could just be like paid more?
Well, no.
No. Like to deal with corruption,
No.
you're getting paid enough. You don't need.
I don't know how much they pay.
There is a set amount that they get paid. Yeah.
You think they'd get paid more if corruption would be lower?
Some people think that, but some people are just corrupt. So,
That's true. No matter what, it's gonna
Any other
We don't
questions?
know.